New ideas face hard questions. And in the blockchain world, there are no easy answers. Dozens of new blockchain projects emerge every week. But innovation and development of new Layer 1 solutions have stalled. At Sonata, we are on a mission to perfect Layer 1's ultimate purpose: to provide a true concept of digital asset ownership through a distributed consensus mechanism. An entirely efficient, trustless ecosystem that allows for peer-to-peer trade on the infrastructure level. That is where the unrealized potential of blockchain lies. Perfecting trust in a trustless environment. It's a bold direction, and it all starts with these three considerations. Is it possible to ever truly own a digital asset? And how does digital asset ownership fit within a legal framework? What are the rights of individuals in a purely digital environment? And can blockchains realistically protect these rights? The future of blockchain depends on how we value privacy, sustainability, ownership, and equality of access. Opportunity is found where communities feel included and empowered. At Sonata, we answer these questions. Learn more about our mission at sonata.com.
Hi everybody, welcome to session 1. Please have a seat. My name is Martin Eckert. I'm the E of MME. We do legal, tax, and compliance. And I've seen the hour zero of the crypto valley. So we brought Ethereum to Zug, and I've seen the development of blockchain from the very beginning. And I'm proud to present you the speakers here on the panel. To my right, Andrew Kessler. He's the CTO and co-founder of Sonata. He's kind of the brain, or one of the brains behind Sonata. He has a science background in biochemistry, and he's a serial entrepreneur. And then there's Walter Strometz. He's the CTO of Signum, the first crypto bank in Switzerland. Welcome, Walter. Afsane Hayat, an experienced senior banker, chief risk officer, and head of compliance at Altcoinomy SA, and she's a crypto enthusiast. And Willy Brammertz, he's the managing director of Ariadne Business Analytics. He has also a science background. He defined in his thesis the elementary parts of finance from the basics of any financial process, including financial analysis. And based on this, he developed Actus, an open source smart financial contract standard. This session goes about the flaws also of the area. Much enthusiasm is about blockchain, but frankly, are the promises really fulfilled? One of the promises, or the first one, is that on the blockchain you can do peer-to-peer transactions. As a lawyer, I see only one-way transactions. Willy, what you think about the promise of peer-to-peer business.
I guess you're talking about financial business, financial contracts. That's what I am talking about. So I think what the blockchain and fintech did not deliver today is really the financial side. It's a lot of technology, but very little finance. Basically, we push money from A to B, be it crypto, be it something else. And that's only a fringe activity of finance. It's true finance is having a financial contract like loans, like deposits, like mortgages, like CDOs, like swaps, etc. And that should be really represented as smart contracts.
Andrew, may you add something?
Yeah, Martin. Firstly, thank you everyone for attending. It's after lunch. I'm sure we're all going to start feeling sleepy pretty soon. For us, it's a bit of a philosophical question, because what you tend to represent on a blockchain is pricing, but there isn't a very good way to represent value, right? So when you're doing a trade, price is something you pay and value is something you get. And that really requires not a one-way push from Alice to Bob, which is what we see on Bitcoin, but Bob has to give Alice something back. So in the early days, and this was either wisdom or foolishness, you could spend 10,000 Bitcoin to buy a pizza. And that's a very classic story you've all heard. But the person who got the pizza didn't get a magical digital pizza. They didn't get digital value. They just got a regular old boring pizza. So to perfect kind of transactions and take them into the future, we really have to think about how do we represent value? Do we think that NFTs really capture meaningful value? And how do we enter that onto a blockchain, and how do we trade that for a Bitcoin or an Ether or something of that degree? So just think about a market. A market emerges when certain economic primitives interact. And I'll list 5 of them, but there's certainly more. Price, value, exchange, goods and services, cash. These things you have to be able to demonstrate, and if you allow them to interact, you have a digital market. So my question to the audience, this isn't meant to push the thinking in any particular way. Do we have electronic cash in a real sense? Do we have electronic value in a real sense? Do we have electronic exchange in a fully distributed way? Do we have electronic pricing? And do we have electronic goods and services? And I think if we're being honest, the answer is maybe we've got 1 out of 5 if we're lucky. So if we want to get to trade and perfecting real digital trade, and this is something that we at Sonata are very caring about deeply, and yourself and everyone else here in the panel, then you have to bring those other elements into a blockchain environment.
Now, if we talk about a perfect transaction, what is needed for a perfect transaction? For me as a lawyer, there are parties, there is consensus, there's somehow an exchange of goods and payment, and then I want to have a receipt, because I have bookkeeping, everything behind me. Is that already realized in today's world, or are we waiting for this?
I'm only talking about the financial side of it. The financial side of it is not represented today. Because a financial contract, as we defined it before, is an exchange of cash flows over time. And those cash flows, they can be, first of all, cash flows are pure numbers, and that fits well into the computer. Secondly, the series of cash flows are algorithmic functions, actually are mathematical functions, with some oracle interaction in between. That can be all put on, that can reside in the computer. These kind of contracts, they can start, live, and be traded to its end. So, and that, there we have a little beginnings of that, very little beginnings.
Okay. What do you think, Walter? What do you see as a banker? Do we still need banks for the perfect transaction?
I probably don't qualify as a banker, but so if you ask if blockchain has delivered its promise or not, I think yes, but in its own bubble. So everything, if you're looking for the perfect transaction, if you're looking for financial, for models like lending, I think they're all there, but it's bubble. So I think the question is not if blockchain or the tech has delivered or not. The question should be more, do people care? So if the people, or if the outside world don't care, then the merge doesn't happen. So the real world assets, the real payment for a pizza, for example, that's not gonna happen like on the blockchain, because those two worlds are not coming together right now. But if you're coming from a technical perspective, I think there's a lot already achieved. But the main challenge here is, to make the people care, that to present the value to the outside world of a trustless system. Most of the transactions we have, there is trust. If you go and buy a car from Toyota, you trust that the car is starting, and there are laws behind it that if it's not starting, you get your money back and stuff like that. So this is all there. So why you need trustless? So I think this is more the main issue here, like how to get the ball rolling in the real world.
So just to pick up from that, I'm going to, just for the sake of making fun debate, I'll take the contrary position. And that is to say that I don't think the tech is even remotely there. And before we even answer the tech issues, there's a broader issue. When you're doing a trade or a transaction, three things are happening simultaneously. There is a social layer where I'm parting with my hard-earned money to get value. Then there's a legal interaction that's happening, and then there is a financial interaction that's happening. And these three things are meant to happen concomitantly on a blockchain, which is why building blockchains is so damn hard, because it's interdisciplinary. You have to get all of the thinking to merge. And this seems trivial when you kind of take the naive approach, right? So let's take a simple example. I just buy a JPEG. There's some NFT, an artist has pushed out a beautiful JPEG, and I want to buy it on a blockchain, as a simple example. Now, in the physical world, when you give me a work of art, it has provable scarcity. I mean, once I have it and I lock it up in my vault, the transfer is done. But in the digital environment, how do I handle the ability to make copies of that? It's not so obvious. How does the law apply to copies? Do copies count as economically equivalent, don't they? Which comes first? So we have to resolve the legal frameworks, the social frameworks, and the technical frameworks before we can really claim to have trade. And then secondly, it comes down a lot to kind of description and timing, and I think standardization. Standardization is probably the least sexy word that you can bring up in a conversation like this. But we want to collaborate. That's the point of a blockchain primarily. And collaboration isn't about holding hands and dancing into the sunset. If you're a producer of a work of art, you agree in the value of art, but you don't agree on the price of art relative to the buyer. The buyer wants the work of art for free. You want $1 million. And so what you have to do is you need a way to collaborate. You need to settle on the price somewhere between, even though you both agree that art has value. And so what blockchains do is they allow enterprise, governments, individuals to collaborate in a transparent and efficient way. And their trust is totally not a suitable model. Because the problem with trust isn't trust. We all trust our neighbors, our society, but trust takes time. And in a digital world, I don't have hours to conduct a trade. If I want a trade to conduct in milliseconds, because I'm a high-frequency trader, trust cannot be a variable. I need a trustless environment, because trustless environments are efficient. So when we talk about trust or not trust, the issue comes down to, do we have faith in our fellow man? We need to focus on how do we give machines the jobs that we don't want to do? How do we bring in transparency and efficiency? And then I think we'll have a perfect trade. And incidentally, I think that only works if you shift your accounting from double entry accounting to dual double entry accounting. I need a way to synchronize my books with your books. And that's when we really have meaningful trade. So when I give you a coin and you give me an asset, we need a way to merge those two ledger entries into a dual double entry, and then I think we're on the road to perfecting trade.
Okay, thank you. Now, when I see what can you do with a Bitcoin today, it's not much. How can we add utility to to these coins? Why do the people don't, or the merchants don't accept Bitcoin?
Can I
Yes,
just?
please.
I mean, you know, I look at digital assets and just blockchain as globally. I mean, I think that there are two issues. One is obviously the regulatory framework, compliance and regulation, which is needed for the big institutions to start entering the space. But more fundamentally, from an adoption perspective, it's still, you know, for most people globally, this is still a complicated world that they don't understand. So we need to find a simple solution. In the same way, I mean, I remember I was there, I mean, I think all of us were, but I was doing my MBA when the internet was being established, you know, the access to the internet. And what really drove the penetration was the browsers. Whether you looked at AOL, whether you looked at Alta Vista and CompuServe, which made surfing for people super easy. I think in order to have the mass adoption that we are looking for, which will also give the push for regulation and the projects to really develop, you need to facilitate the creation of wallets. I mean, as a first point, you know, if people are scared about not sending money to the right wallet address because it's a 30-digit and alphabetical, it's an alphanumerical code or word, but believe me, I've been in this for 4.5 years and I'm still scared when I want to do a transaction. So I think that the solution has to be that as a first step, because then if people can, let's say, have a wallet that is linked to an email address, then you make it simple. Then they'll start saying, okay, so I use my email address and I want to send Andrew some money. It's easy. Then I'll buy the Bitcoins because then I can transact because I understand email. I don't understand, you know, this alphanumerical code. So for me, that is what's going to already start driving penetration. And then you've got regulation, which too much regulation is a bad thing, but some regulation is necessary. And I think that if we look at what happened with Luna, right? So the day that Do Kwon decided to put Bitcoin as part of the backing, as the reserve, if he had a proper risk officer, maybe that risk officer would have said, well, hold on, you know, here are the risks with changing the dynamic of your reserve and not testing it before announcing it to the market. So I think that these are the points that will need to be addressed before we get the real penetration happening on the blockchain.
Yeah, Afsane, if I can just pick up from that, I couldn't agree more. And that's kind of optimizing what we already have. But where we're going to move it into what we don't have and take it into the future is to understand that there are two kinds of ways that we value things. So there's intrinsic value, which is the thing itself is valuable. Water is a perfect example. And then there's things that are instrumentally valuable. They're just a means to an end, right? So a cup is only a means to an end. If I don't have a cup, I can substitute it for something else. There's a degree of fungibility to it, right? So what blockchain has really spent a lot of time trying to understand is bringing instrumental value to people, means to an end. And I want to map this now to sort of how you think about computer systems. So the application you use to read your email, I don't know, maybe by show of hands, who's on Gmail? Who's on Microsoft Office, right? And you guys are communicating with one another. You don't really care about what app you're using as long as it has a certain standardization. So there's an amount of fungibility in your choice at application layer. And that's because applications are instrumentally valuable. When you drop your cell phone into the lake, you don't go, there go my applications, you just reinstall them. But what do you say? You go, oh no, there go all my files. And that's because the photograph of you and the wife on holiday, or your PDF, which is a certificate that you have to something, these are the things that are intrinsically valuable and cannot be reproduced. And so while we have to get our instrumentation layer easy to use, if a hammer is very complicated to use, no one uses it. So to Afsane's point, mainstream adoption is achievable if we make the hammer really simple and really obvious. But we also need nails. We need things of intrinsic value. We need to bring files and things that actually capture value and bring them to the blockchain as well.
But the file, I can just copy paste it. It has no value.
Yes, which is why you need to find a way to make files behave legally and economically. You need to introduce ideas like provable scarcity. I mean, conceptually, copying a file isn't disastrous. If you go to the Louvre and you see the Mona Lisa, and you take a photo of it, no one thinks you devalued the Mona Lisa. No one says, "Oh, there goes the economic value," and that's just because we can tell the difference between the original and the copy. Why copies in a digital environment or updates or edits are so damaging is there's no way to track or understand which is the copy and which was the original. And so you really want to think about strategies. If you're dealing with digital assets as an artist, you're dealing with game NFTs, or whatever it is, you need a way to try and spot the original from the copy. There's several approaches. Zonata uses something called identity-based ownership. We give every file its own DNA. So we can spot a copy from a copy from a copy. If you're on Ethereum, you want to be using salts. So you want to add a salt to the end of something to give it uniqueness. And so the hash of the salt is also unique. But introducing uniqueness is your challenge, and then you don't have to worry about copy.
So if I understand you correctly, there's a kind of concept of ownership for files then in the future. Because today it has almost no value. But if you really can make it unique and tradable, then it has value. Because you can own it.
I'd like to get Willie to weigh in on something before I go. So this is something we were discussing, and maybe I'm phrasing it in the wrong way. Some things you don't need to own the way you own a piece of property. So I'd just like to know, to get your impact, where's the requirements for owning financial contracts and financial instruments? How do we think about ownership in that setting?
A financial contract is an agreement between two counterparties. It only comes into existence if two counterparties agree to exchange cash flows over time following certain rules. So the contract itself should be there should be only one contract, ideally maybe on the blockchain, and then there are two owners to it, one ower and one owner. So there is an asset side, there's a liability side. And the difference between is plus minus. So the cash flow I give you, I will give, you will receive. So that's how you own that contract.
However, from a file perspective, ownership is completely different, right? So there are three ways that you can own anything, and if there's a fourth, please come and tell me afterwards. These are the three I know about. So there's property law, and that gives you the strongest claim and right to a thing if you own a piece of property, right? So for example, if the government starts doing funny things to the underpinnings of what values land, I can take them to court for expropriation. There's expropriation acts that apply to land. If you think about intellectual property, which is another way to own something, intellectual property is a weaker claim. Governments can, with impunity, exercise expropriation of IP. So during Corona, if you're a big pharma and you've got a solution to solving the pharmaceutical conundrum of COVID, a government can expropriate your rights to that IP to handle times of pandemics. They can do that. There's nothing you can do. So your claim to your IP is weaker than your claim to a piece of land. And then even weaker than intellectual property is copyright and trademarks. That's the weakest way that you can own anything. And so when we talk about owning a file, we're talking about copyright and trademark ownership. And so as a community, but also we as Zonata, we've built a framework that enables you to take your ownership rights to something much closer to property ownership. And that's very, very different. And that's really going to impact the digital economy as well.
Thank you. We had the question why this relation between the crypto world and the real world is not so strong as it could be. And you said compliance is a big issue there. governance. What are the conditions, the requisites that, let's say, that the old world and the new world can fit together?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally it's the compliance and regulation, and it is trust. I mean, we keep talking about trust, and as long as the crypto world is seen as a venue for bad actors, and when you don't have regulations, you do allow bad actors to interact on blockchains because it's very complicated. When you're looking at decentralized exchanges where it's peer-to-peer, how do you make sure that your counterparty is it's clean money? Because it's going to transit, because individuals don't have forensic tools to check before doing a trade. And as Andrew said, a trader, it's going to take him a millisecond or she before they want to execute. So I think you need to build that trust by really changing the image of what cryptocurrencies is about. And as long as cryptocurrencies is about making quick money, which is a lot of players that are the most active ones in this field are the ones that are just in it for the quick buck, whether it's the pump and dump. It just gives the wrong impression to the traditional world about what is the use, as in the technology side of it gets lost in the message, right? Because everybody thinks about what do people remember. I know that there are a lot of people who don't even follow digital assets, and they all heard about Terra Luna's collapse. Why? Because this is what the traditional market will pick up on. The news stations pick up on some blow up and yet again a scam, or it's only the bad news that gets out. The true story of the projects and what they are trying to build on the blockchain hasn't gotten out. And I think the image has to change, and the image will change when central banks or regulators start implementing some kind of regulation, but in a way that allows the blockchain to grow. And I think that that's going to make a difference over the long term. And as long as it stays in the world that it stays in, I think it's going to be very difficult.
But can we technically build in compliance and privacy and governance and identity and all these issues? Can we technically build it on a let's say Ledger 1 level?
Yeah, I believe that standards are very important, and standards create transparency. It happens there, it's just now a Swiss National Fund project going on with Lucerne University, Zurich University, and Winterthur, where we are going to prove the regulators that regulation, first of all, will become much easier and much more meaningful, so much more information. So, and it builds on the Actus standard, actually. And as we said, the Actus standard is an algorithmic representation of any financial contract. So take it from a saving account to a CDO and exotic options, etc. So with that system, regulators could really understand what is going to happen from a financial perspective. That's not less the fraud part, but how dangerous is the system, how much loaded is the system. The regulator, instead of asking a report, would get actually the real details of the contract and would do the analytics themselves. They could do a stress test, they could do anything. And so standards really play a very important role because it creates transparency. And we all want to be honest here, isn't it? We want to have the crooks out. And that's a very good way of doing it.
So I would say there's one extra layer of complexity, and that's what you're going to hear, I think, for the remainder of the talk, is extra layers of complexity. Transparency is great, but it is also the natural enemy of privacy. And so there's a lot of these design conflicts. So I think it was some of the swaps, I'm not going to mention who they are, exchanges, went for violating users' privacy in order to have compliance and transparency. And the banks loved them, but the users hated them. And it's not a matter of compromise. What's really fascinating about blockchain technologies is if you do it right and if you really deeply understand what's going on, and there's only a handful of chains that actually give you the ability to manage both, you can, and if you're thinking about moving into data, The legislative framework demands you give the client privacy, GDPR, CCPA. And that's kind of at odds with reporting and financial legislation. So you kind of normally, traditionally have to pick one over the other. Are you going to make sure that your books are in order in case the regulator comes after you, or are you going to defend the rights of the individual, because you certainly can't do both, right? And so that's an important reason why we have to move to dual double entries. Dual double entry is when I give you a coin and you give me something else, because the something else can be kept private, but the coin can be accountable. And so that's how we're going to find the balance to solve these very difficult issues.
Maybe here. Yes, also in terms of the financial contracts, there are two things. One is the promise to exchange cash flows, the rules, how we exchange the cash flows. The other one is the ownership. You know, who sits on the asset side and who sits on the liability side. And I think the privacy issue goes mainly on the ownership. And the contract itself should be understood by anybody who is involved in it. And that's especially important if you talk about CDOs and stuff like that, where you have one contract which points to thousands of contracts, which then is the conglomerate which you own a part of. And that should be open, and ownership, that should be protected.
Precisely. So, I mean, with future thinking in mind, you really have to have these modular operations. And the problem with kind of the old gods in the crypto space, they weren't thinking this far down the road. They had a more immediate challenge. Is it possible to send money over untrusted nodes, over an unreliable network between two parties? That wasn't a solved problem. So with the answer being absolutely yes, you can, if you back proof of work. We have now found ourselves kind of being a victim of our own success, because now we're asked for more subtle design constraints, and separating out things like ownership from contractual logic is something that you need to bring in as modular operations.
Thank you. Maybe, Walter, how do you deal in a bank from a tech side with compliance?
Yeah, basically we have to follow, we are a bank, so there's no difference between us and any other bank or any other institution who has to follow like anti-money laundering obligations. With the banking license we can offer more services, that's clear. But in the end, all you talk about, of course we have to do, otherwise we will be out of business very quickly, forced out of business basically. So it's not about, we are not changing Ethereum, we are not changing, I don't know, Tezos or other protocols, we are not changing Aave or all these DeFi protocols, but still our part is, let's also coming back what you said, is taking out the complexity for our users, because basically, the users trust us that we know what we are doing, and we are doing it in that kind of way. And let's say what you are talking about is that you basically want to bake in beneficial ownership into the chain, into level one. That's how I understood it. Still, so that I think there are applications for it. Might make our life things here and there easier. This is the things like travel rule, which may be implemented with that as well. So, but in the end, what we are doing as a bank is, we fill the gaps with manual processes, with technical solutions, with onboarding, checking the passport, checking the ID, whitelisting, wallet addresses, etc., etc. So. Everything you need, or is we just fill in order to be compliant. I think it's straightforward.
Just a quick question between the two of us, and I think we will be in agreement here. I deeply feel sorry for banks trying to get into the blockchain space, because Switzerland, for example, as a country, is very pro crypto, and they try and push that mandate on banks to be more crypto friendly. But banks also can lose their license at a moment's notice if they don't follow regulation and compliance. So I don't think it's a lack of willingness from banks to embrace crypto more fully, but it really is the burden from both the consumer and the provider largely gets transferred to banks to stand in for that. And there, I think, what the blockchain ecosystem can move towards is by providing this tooling from the ledger so that the banks don't have to take that risk and ownership themselves, to kind of provide more liquidity and more lubrication in this process. Because in a sense, you have a common ledger that has potentially all the data fields you need to do a lot of this. Anti-money laundering, I think, Afsane, your belief, and I agree with it, is good luck automating that in a meaningful way. But certainly KYC is something that the blockchain itself can help lubricate as a process. And so if the layer ones, and what I kind of see as a worrying trend for me is when there isn't a solution for a bank or a government at layer one, they look for it in layer two or at application space layer. And that's always where it kind of goes wonky, you know. Axie Infinity as a concept didn't break at Axie Infinity, it broke at the exchange, it broke at the layer 2 and the layer 3, right? And then everyone wants to turn around and get all upset with Axie Infinity. But we should remember that if it's not happening at layer 1, it's not really happening. So with that in mind, when you're trying to pick what blockchain you're going to support and where you're going to push your economics and finance and what regulatory frameworks you're going to build off of, it makes more sense to find a collaborative layer 1 that can really provide some support.
Just one comment, maybe a different angle. So how we see it, so you have traditional finance, that's clear. Then you have DeFi. That's good, and the world also lets it happen. Some countries not, but the most are. So it's okay, even if you have like big crashes like Luna. So everybody's accepting like, okay, there's something going out there, but it doesn't risk financial stability. So it's kind of accepted or not. We will see how the regulators behave. But at Sygnum, and what we are doing here is something completely different, has nothing to do with layer 0 or layer 1 or whatever. We are creating a new industry. Let's call it future finance. It's wherever we go, we take things from the Wild West and put it in the context of a banking environment, a regulated environment, so that we can play our trust, which is granted by the old world. And every step we do with MME, so for example, if we come with a lending protocol, or we were the first bank who offered Ethereum staking as a bank, and every step we take, we create new land, we create new soil. We are conquering new territory. Nothing to do with level 1 again, because we get the facts from the financial authority. Look, this is possible. This is now a regulatory field for all banks, the whole world. We have also a headquarters in Singapore, so the world is looking at Switzerland. It's small. It's kind of a sandbox, I guess, as well a little bit. Singapore is the same, so we have more freedom, maybe more collaborative approach with the regulatory, but we create new stuff. And behind us, everybody can build on that. So this is really a different thinking we have. So we are not like the nerdy guys who think about the new kind of stuff or how we can fiddle in the beneficial owner in some smart contract. We are really taking the things which are out there, like creating the foundations with the authorities, make it clear how it is seen, and then you can build new skyscrapers on it. And there we agree totally. So that's the regulatory foundation where you can have much more sustainable business models. The industry can grow much bigger because the regulatory won't change. That's almost clear. They don't give you a grant and next day say, oh, no, we don't do it. So that's why they're so slow. So maybe to sum up in more technical terms, like we are waiting for the Ethereum merge since, I don't know, 5 years, I think, since Casper was discussed. Then they are moving very slow, and we are waiting year over year that they deliver, and they don't. Why they don't deliver? They don't want to screw up. And in our case, it's completely the same. We have to move step by step in small steps, but we are not allowed to fall in some kind of trap, or we have to test it very thoroughly every step. And that's also the thinking of the authorities. So this is the way I see it. So not like we solve everything in tech, but really take the whole regulators, create foundations, and then let it grow there.
So I suppose.
Can I just add one thing to your point about KYC? And I think the blockchain can help there. It's just that we need to develop it, and that is with the NFTs. We can create identities, right? You can input a KYC of an individual in an NFT, which when I go and I show that I have that NFT, it effectively reflects that I have been KYC'd, so that I no longer need to send my passport to Signum when I want to open a bank account at Signum, to BNP, to because that is really the problem right now, is that for every step we want to take today, we have to disclose information. Whereas if we can do it via, and I think that's where blockchain is going to help, via an NFT, then what happens is I can temporarily show my NFT to the bank. They can look, they see that all the information has been validated, and then it simplifies the work for the traditional world, and it allows me to keep my privacy fundamentally, because the bank doesn't need to have my passport in their possession at all times. They can ask me every 6 months to show it to them, to make sure that it's still valid and everything. But I think that's, these are the types of bridges that will then allow the traditional world and the blockchain world to start merging. And moving from one end, from the traditional side to the digital side.
And Afsane, that was going to be my closing point, is that.
Sorry,
no, absolutely, but it's a point very well made. So you're looking at three actors: the state, the individual, and the bank, right? And they have different relationships and different responsibilities. Why not use a blockchain? And that's really my point. So we're so used to trying to. I don't think the slogan sort of "be your own bank." That's kind of Bitcoin slogan. It has a purpose, and there's a message there they're trying to drive home. In other words, we can move to a world of self-custody. You can take on the responsibility of keeping $2 million under your mattress if you do it right. That's the hope and promise of Bitcoin. You don't need an institution necessarily to book your assets or your funds, right? That world is going to become increasingly more possible. But at the end of the day, somebody has to take responsibility for certain things. If I want to loan money, and so banking functions are still very, very important. Rather than replacing them, we can make them more efficient with blockchain technology. So, yeah, to your point.
May I address another issue? It's about the machine behind everything. The throughput, the latency, proof of work, the 51% attack risk, the energy consumption. What are the solutions there? I think this is not possible to work with a machine like this.
So Martin, that's a very good question. There's two things there. If two engineers get together to build a skyscraper 100 years ago, they're going to do all their calculations on a sheet of paper, right? And now with modern computers, you do it on your laptop. The reason you use your laptop or your computer to build a skyscraper rather than doing it on paper has nothing to do with trust. It's about efficiency. You can do the work quicker, cheaper, with less risk. That's why I use a computer, right? And so using a computer to make a payment or to create a financial instrument or to do regulation isn't about we don't trust our fellow man. It's that how many billion people are unbanked? You're going to put a human in front of each of these billion people to vet them and KYC them and check their passports. It won't scale. So this isn't a question, it's a statement. If we are going to create an inclusive economy that allows even 30% of people globally to interact, we have to go onto machines. So going machine executable isn't a wish list or a hippie dream. It's the only way this thing's going to work, right? That being said, the kind of throughput and latency that we see with layer ones that are inherently secure, like Bitcoin, leave a lot to be desired. And as you create better infrastructure with higher throughput and lower latency, the easy way to do this is to cut security corners, right? So you can be less secure and faster, or you can be slower and more secure, but what you really need to invent is something that's both secure and fast. And that's very, very hard to do, right? That's two opposing design goals. But the good news is you actually can do it. I want to leave that as a little bit of a sort of a hint or Easter egg or a teaser. If you want to know more about that, come speak to me afterwards, just because it gets very, very technical. But the insight comes, proof of work is physics and proof of stake is politics, right? There's nothing wrong with politics. It works if you're political, but proof of work is physics. So let's back the proof of work horse. And here the insight is that people measure something called hash rate, and the belief is that the more hash rate you have in a network, the more secure the network is. That's not actually true. It's the distribution of that hash rate. The distribution of the hash rate as a metric is far more exciting, because if everyone has a bit of hash rate, you all have a bit of Bitcoin. So that's both creating an inclusive economy and making the economy more secure at the same time. So if you actually solve the distribution of hash rate problem, and that is a hard problem to solve, and you want to know the solution again, come talk to me, then what you have is you have low latency, high throughputs, and security, and lower energy consumption.
Promising. What we are all here for business. What can we do to grow the crypto business, to grow our space? What is needed?
I'm not sure whether I'm the right. Yeah, no, I have an answer. As you said, a really low-hanging fruit is the financial sector, because the financial contract is just a thing which can live in on the blockchain itself. Adding yet to the point before, I think there's another rule, let's say a short-term solution, put on the blockchain only what needs to go on the blockchain and don't put anything else. Keep everything else off-chain. And the things which in the financial sector have to go to the blockchain are those financial contracts which are traded. They should be seen by everybody. If you have a simple contract just on your book, with somebody else, which stays there all the time, I would never put that on the blockchain. The value is null, in my opinion, because they trust in my statement as much as whether it comes from the blockchain or whether I send it to them. So I think that's a very essential rule. And I think it will be around for a long time.
Okay. Walter, what do you mean? What's on your wish list?
Wish list for?
For growing?
For growing, yeah. Talk to people. That's change thoughts. You change the world mostly by talking. And now, I think in our case in the industry, having events like this, spread the word, explain what's happening, and create trust in that way. And technically speaking, I think there's not one thing which we're waiting for. I think it's already there. The point of no return is behind us, in my opinion. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the industry. So, of course, I'm confident. I'm quite. It will go down, it will go up. I think. Maybe to elaborate a bit more, I think we are in a typical cycle, like in Styria, where I grew up, people were scared of steam trains. There were books written about it. It's the devil which is coming, and they were fighting steam trains. And before that, it was electricity. After that, it was phones. You have it on the ear, you get cancer. In the internet was not trusted. It even was discussed to, let's say, centralize it. So the decentralized versus decentralized was also back then a big discussion. And blockchain is also tech people don't trust the new technology. If you go over a bridge and you see that you can fall down, you just don't run over it. Maybe if you're a bit crazy, like the 10% early adopters, like we are, you do it. But it just takes time that people get used to the tech and don't ask questions anymore. And at the end, taking one of the examples, if you're taking a phone, you don't know how it works. You just use it, and at one point of time, it will be similar with blockchain.
I'd like to add one final point. Who here has heard what they believe is a good definition or a good explanation for what blockchain technology is? Right? I'm going to give you my best stab, and this is 5 years in the making. If you have something better, I would love to hear it from you. I want you to think that there are 3 things that you need in order to have a blockchain. At the base, you need a resource that is worth distributing, right? It can be a coin or whatever it is, or art, or there's a resource, right? On top of the resource, you have an infrastructure layer, which nobody ever talks about. This is the layer of mining rigs that enforce good management and good standing of that resource. Why the infrastructure layer is so exciting? What does blockchain mining take as inputs? Energy and compute power. What is the world short on? Silicon. There is a computing crisis. What does the world want to move energy to? They want to move energy from just-in-case energy production to just-in-time energy production, right? So that infrastructure layer that's defending your payments is also an energy grid, and it's also a compute grid, right? So when it's not mining, and Sweden has made relationships with the mining community, that on peak traffic or peak volume, where they need energy more, the miners cycle down from mining Bitcoin and dump their power into the national grid. So that infrastructure layer is incredibly powerful and interesting. And then on top of it, you've got a protocol layer. And that protocol layer is where you pull some code, you write a contract, you make some payment, you do something fun, right? So to grow the ecosystem, let's not just have tokens as a resource. Let's add data as a resource. That's going to grow the ecosystem. Let's not only have infrastructure really proof of stake is great, but let's move to other infrastructures that have other utilities. And then at the protocol layer, let's make it more accessible. Let's integrate it with regulators. Let's integrate it legally. And if we do those 3 things, you'll expand the overall ecosystem.
What can you buy then on the Zenota ecosystem in the future? What's your vision? What can you buy there? Just coins?
This is going to sound like a snake oil pitch. Everything. So because Alan Turing, when asked what can you do with a computer, he's like anything. That's very different to, okay, how do you solve a triple integral? Alan Turing says, I don't know how you solve the triple integral. I just know this machine can do it. So industry partners have to build out the tooling and the support for it. And there's a reason why blockchains can't really be general purpose. Oracles, unlike computers, are specific. If you ask a specific question, you get a specific answer. A computer can do a little bit of everything, right? So computers are general structures, oracles are specific structures. Having said that, you want the most diverse oracle possible. And of course, that's a data oracle because we represent so much of our stuff with data. So I want to be able to look at a file and say, who owns this? I want to be able to look at a field and says, what does this mean? What is its price point? If I can really oracleize data, I've got a general purpose blockchain machine. So because we work on that, you'll be able to buy just about anything.
Thank you. Thank you for this session. Thank you for being here.